I thank the ranking member, and I thank you for the suggestions and trying to create the tone that I think that we need for this committee. This committee should investigate and gather facts and be able to make recommendations, possibly suggest legislation, but establish protocol and a process. I've said since the beginning, this is an after-action review, lessons learned, and develop a path forward, and hopes that if there is another pandemic, that we might be able to predict it, prepare for it, protect ourselves from it, and maybe prevent it. And I understand, you know, we've all agreed, we all know at the beginning, we're erring on the side of caution. I'm supportive of that, but it doesn't mean we don't look back in retrospect. And some of that may involve some litigation, more of it may just involve, well, how can we do better? You know, we should be looking at things if the country of origin is lying about what is going on, lying to us, lying to the WHO, we need to investigate how we engage with the WHO and these other countries. Today is about freedom and constitutionality and inconsistencies. And there were clear inconsistencies on what was going on around the country. Different rules on gathering. You know, as I look at what I heard today, you know, government doesn't collect many taxes from churches, but they do from NFL games, and they do from casinos. Is that the reason for the decision being made? I think it's important that we question that. There may be an underlying motive to allow this thing to happen and this other not to happen. You know, we have to take a look at overall health, not just COVID. That was the problem from the very beginning in our country as we addressed this pandemic. Everything was about the virus. Every day it was about the virus. It wasn't about the effects, the other effects that came from lockdowns and other people's health. I had a sheriff call me and tell me that a guy just 71 years old was scheduled to have his painful hernia surgery, and it was canceled. It was canceled. He committed suicide. He was in so much pain. There were no cases in that county at the time. We have to take a look at these things, these inconsistencies that have lead to greater harmful effects and violations of our civil rights and constitutional rights. If we're doing things that enhance suicide and depression, especially among a group that's at low to no risk of COVID, that's not good public health. We have to look back and say, did we make a mistake? And admit to it if we did, and be better the next time. The next pandemic may not look anything like this, so our process has to be clear. And, you know, I will say that direct and indirect censorship is un-American. Debating hypothesis and debating opinions is American. Censorship is what I grew up learning what the USSR was about, not what America's about. You know, if opinions of any of these members on either side of the aisle were taken down because you put them on your website, and I may disagree with my friend on some opinion in this process, but he puts it up on his website, I should not have the ability to take his opinion down just because I don't like it, or just because I want to propose a different narrative. That's what our government's about, debating anyway, and we should have that opportunity. Here's my opinion on the mandates. It increased hesitancy amongst Americans. That's my opinion, because Americans, for one, don't do very well with "because I told you so." They're pretty resistant to that. Just ask your kids once they hit about 5 years old. But I will tell you, I've been promoting all the time that what happened to the doctor-patient relationship? And from the very beginning, I said America should be hearing from the doctors treating COVID patients, not politicians and not people in the lab. And that's where I think we went awry. We had a little get-together Frank Luntz put together. These were all vaccine-hesitant people, okay? When we sat and talked to them, about the vaccine. And I talked about potential side effects. I talked about the efficacy. I talked about who's most vulnerable and why. And I talked about how you can still get COVID even if you get the vaccine, but you're less likely to get sick. This is what the trial showed. But that doesn't mean you'll never get COVID. To a person, they all said, I just want to be educated, not indoctrinated, and now I'm less hesitant to get it. We didn't conduct ourselves that way, and a mandate certainly doesn't do that. If you want to make a guideline, say the guideline is go and talk to your doctor about what's best for your particular health, because we know certain people were vulnerable, other people were not. You may have allergies. Ms. Dingle talked about that. She got Guillain-Barré. She was a perfect example. When she talked to her doctor, she felt at ease. We didn't do that as a government. And that, to me, is one of our biggest problems. We talked today about supply chain. If you'd have told me when I was a surgeon in Iraq that my protective equipment and my pharmaceuticals relied on an adversary, China, I said, how did our military get here? Bad enough the civilian side did that. We're not independent when it comes to our health anymore. We're dependent on China for our medicines, down to the active pharmaceutical ingredients. And by the way, that wasn't just under one administration. That was under Republican administrations and Democrat administrations where we let our supply chain get out the door. Look, it was important that the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus hear from notable public officials. We're grateful that you testified before us today regarding potentially unconstitutional actions taken by federal, state, and local authorities, and some of them were unconstitutional as deemed by the Supreme Court. I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. You weren't here just for a lecture from the two of us, I don't think. But I do want to thank you for that. And we heard concerning testimony about government overreach and some defense of it today. We heard about the lengths that states had to go to so they could defend individual liberties of its citizens from mandates that stripped them of their rights and silenced their dissents. We're allowed to contest our government. That's what our founders had in mind. Let's not be deceived. There's been an attempt to censor speech you don't like, challenge to your message. The counters are narrowment. It's documented. We need to address this. We need to address this as a Congress, not just this committee, but as a Congress in general. The power of the people, nor their representatives, should be usurped during a crisis. And what should have united us as a country became politics and divided us tremendously. This committee has a responsibility to the American people to speak up for those whose First Amendment rights were stripped, and any other rights that they feel were taken away from them during this pandemic. Especially when things that were imposed were contrary to the science and to the data. It's our responsibility to look at that. So we need to investigate these matters. And it deserves the highest standard of review, because it's no small thing for the government to impose on individual liberties, not in the United States of America. Maybe somewhere else, but not here. Because most of the people in this country came to this country because they wanted to get away from governments that did just that. And that's our history. Churches, synagogues, mosques were shuttered. Citizens encouraged to tell on their neighbors if they were found to participate in religious services. This is wrong. Religious freedom is the ability to practice your sincerely held beliefs and how you see fit to worship. It's not a guideline for how you may practice as outlined by the government. And by the way, I will say this as a Catholic, virtually you cannot receive the sacraments that are very near and dear to you in the Catholic faith. You cannot do that virtually. Houses of worship were closed, casinos were open, liquor stores. We've heard it all today. We've discussed so much of this. We have concerns that OSHA exceeded its authorities But it's in times of national emergencies when we must be vigilant in protecting our God-given rights that are enshrined in our Constitution. As Benjamin Franklin responded when asked on what sort of government the delegates had created at the Constitutional Convention, he said, "A republic if you can keep it." We need to keep it. It's worked better than any other government ever known to mankind. The Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic will continue to investigate the implementation or effectiveness of any federal law or regulation applied, enacted, or under consideration to address the coronavirus pandemic and prepare for future pandemics. I think this hearing was an essential step in doing so. I thank you all for your participation today. With that, and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witness for their response. And if there's no further business, without objection, the Select Subcommittee stands adjourned.